Josh Freed, CEO of Proximity, and he's here to talk about moving to flex, CRE trends, and the future of the workspace. Josh?
Yeah, hi. How are you guys?
Welcome.
Good. Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm going to keep this fairly simple. It's kind of funny. I've gone back and forth with this concept of having a presentation about where we're headed in trends, but every time I try to publish it, it changes. I think that's just the reality of where we're at right now. So what I thought I'd do is I'd use my time, and we'll see how timing goes, to hopefully just impart, at least to those that will pay attention to this, in whichever industry they happen to be in, with just some insight from a company that gets to see a little bit broader of a picture of where we're at market-wise. So real quick, Proximity is space activation software. So from coworking to flex to headquarters, what we do is we make space bookable and knowable and trackable. What's interesting right now is coming out of a pandemic, that's become a trend that is holding right now, which is space needs to become knowable. So I think what I wanted to do is I wanted to first start by kind of addressing the four main kind of characteristics and industries that we're paying attention to. That is asset management. So those are your commercial real estate asset managers and landlords, your operators of flexible space, be that flex operators such as a WeWork or an Industrious or a VentureX, as well as independents. And then the kind of emergence of some new ones, which is the employers and their headquarters as spaces, as it relates to space. And I think what I want to do is I want to just kind of talk through what the market is doing right now and just give that kind of impression of you really have to check the motivations of the people that are talking. And coming from the last several months of conversations, last several weeks of in-person meetings, I'm still doing them as of today. The first thing that I wanted to kind of call out as a trend is motivation is the first thing that we're checking. It seems so simple to understand, but really where we're at in the market, where we're headed for workspace, where we're headed for the campus, the employer, it is wholly dependent on who is talking and what their motivation is. So for example, commercial real estate needs the industry to think that it's going back to normal, that we're going to use space much like we did pre-pandemic. Employers somewhat need you to understand that they're going to have similar expectations on their employees or potentially radically different expectations. Flex operators need to think that this was the catalyst that's moving us heavy to flex. The problem is most of those opinions are kind of counter to each other. And they seem to be kind of talking on both directions of where market could be headed. So the very first thing and very first trend that I wanted to call out is motivations seem to be driving expectations right now. And it changes based on who needs what from that conversation. And Proximity just happens to be in a position where we get to see that perspective across multiple conversations. So we get to see where they vary and where they overlap and when they're not so unique. Another thing that's happening right now in the industry when it comes to commercial space, and space being, again, either commercial real estate or employer campus or flex space, just space in general, is that conversations are being sought, but answers are also not very clear. It's really interesting to look at from the industry providers that several industries don't have a lot to talk about with their customers right now, at least conversations that they're used to having. From tenant representation groups to commercial furniture providers, the conversation that they're having to have with their customer is changing radically because their use of that space is changing or is unclear. So when we watch what is happening with space, we're watching for those triggers that companies are having to get into an uncomfortable position of having new conversations with their customers around things like, how do I use the space I have? What space am I going to need in the future? What space am I going to get rid of in the future? How do we need to relay it out? These are all topics that we're not ready for and we're not necessarily equipped for, depending on the industry they were in. And now they're sitting there talking to their customers and talking them through some of these pain points. And, one of the biggest kind of questions that's out there right now is, was the pandemic and was the radical shift to remote and to remote work, was it truly a catalyst for changing how we use space? Was it merely an acceleration of a shift in flexibility that we already saw coming? From an industry standpoint, we were watching anywhere between 4 and 6% of flexible space being utilized by employers. At this point now we're starting to see 10, 12, 14% usage from employers. But is that going to continue? Is it going to rein back, or is it going to multiply? These are all questions that are being asked right now. And if we stop, and every time we stop as a company and reevaluate conversations, it's really unclear as to whether this was a catalyst moment for us as an industry. There's plenty of talks that we are going to move to a full flex, that the way that we worked before is not the way that we're going to be working in the future. And I'd like to believe that. I'm having a hard time with that. I don't know about your guys' LinkedIn feeds, but I know mine is full of contrary opinions, depending on if you're looking at the bank president, if you're looking at the small employer, if you're looking at recruiter sites, if you're looking at job boards, of whether or not as an industry and as a society, we have changed how we're going to work or not. And I don't think the answer is binary. I don't think that it's as simple as saying a yes or no. I think it actually comes down to who is asking the question. I think one of the big trends that I would pay attention to is what was learned during the pandemic, what was learned by the changes necessary within that shifted commercial real estate. And was it a positive learning experience, or was it a negative learning experience? And I think that has a lot to do with this. You don't necessarily see an absolute yes or no that it was positive or it was negative, but some companies weathered this shift easier and saw a net benefit from being more open, more trustworthy of productivity from their employees. Employees found more happiness with the flexibility. Also, to that contrary, we had plenty of employees that found a negative result from lack of structure, from lack of community. One of the first things that we watched as a network, as proximity activates hundreds of brands. One of the first things that we saw and we kind of called out was there's always been this like hidden negativity in a work from home model. And we all knew this because of flex and coworking side, but that the lack of community interaction starts to lead towards less productivity and starts to lead towards mental health issues, because you're not engaging, you're not being engaged by others. So we knew that there was going to be this pendulum switch out of working from home and need to work elsewhere. It just comes down to a question whether the employers saw how to adjust for it, but then also saw the net benefit of flexibility. And I would say, as of today, where I sit, we haven't seen enough answers coming out of employers to know what the future of most headquarters is going to look like. But we are seeing a lot of questions, which is a good point to be at. Something else that needs to be kind of looked at when you're talking about trends and where commercial real estate is going is there was for the first time in a very long time, the headquarters is in play. This idea that your headquarters, both your primary and any satellites, are somewhat up for grabs right now as to how they're used, why they're used, when they're used. An easy way to look at that would be to say the need, the size, the place, the purpose are all being put up for debate right now. And that hasn't happened in a long time. And one of the biggest hesitations that we're seeing from employers, especially around their campuses, is the fear of being wrong. And I think from a takeaway standpoint, the fear of being wrong when it comes to what to do with your headquarters and your employees is a very real hesitation point for employers. And to get them past that, the only thing that we've found so far to successfully get them past that is data and is activation of space. So making assets, be it a desk, be it your office, be it your conference room, be it a phone booth, be it an open space, making those things knowable, bookable, and trackable is about the only thing that can solve for that, because the employer needs more data. Data around, I made this space available to my employees, I made this space available to others, but was it used? Why was it used? How much was it used? Who wasn't using it is a big question, and why weren't they using it? And I think the more employers go to try to solve for the need for more data, the more we're going to see comfort around making changes. So that's kind of where, when you look at platforms like Proximity, and there are others as well too, where you will start to see more comfort coming in from employers. You're going to start seeing more technology being deployed, more assets becoming bookable, and that is wholly going to be around setting up for future decisions. So some of the things that are holding, and some of the things that from a trend standpoint that do look like, as much as everything that we're watching right now is kind of in flux, and I would say we're going to stay in flux. And honestly, I thought there's so many expectations around where we are going to be by June, July of this year. And now at this point, my expectations are by the end of this year, you're going to see a deployment of only a certain kind of set features in commercial real estate. So some of those things that are holding right now, an obvious statement of more square footage per person. When we look at how an office is laid out, how a building is laid out, what is required, no matter what, we are not for the foreseeable future going to see kind of that sardine can approach to people. I've been in several spaces while I've been in New York for the last week and a half. And flexible spaces, open seating is open, which is a little bit of a surprise. We didn't actually think it was going to come back that fast. It is being used. It is being used by under less density and more cleaning regimen, but it is encouraging to see open space being used versus you would have gone 3 to 4 or 5 months ago. It was only booked assets like an office or a conference room or a phone booth. Those kind of things were the only assets being booked. Open seating was not being deployed. So to see that come back is good. That means we are, at least by some level, comfortable being around each other, which is an encouraging moment to kind of watch. But the fact of the matter is more square footage is going to be required per person, no matter the asset class. If it's commercial real estate, if it's flexible space, if it's your campus, more square footage per person is going to be required. We are not comfortable being sandwiched together right now. And that's probably going to hold for several years. The tolerance for illness when it comes to headquarters and when it comes to our work has shifted, and I would say has shifted in a permanent manner. That and that goes across lots of sectors, but as we're talking about commercial real estate and especially employers, the tolerance for being ill and working remotely during that time period is, I think this is a set trend now. Kind of gone are likely the days of tough it out, you're coming to work anyways, and back are the days of don't spread what you don't need to, get your work done at home and come back when you're feeling better. And that includes using like public facilities when you're sick. Like it's going to come down to masks when you're not feeling well, or masks when you're uncomfortable in your surroundings are going to be normalized versus a abnormal occurrence. And then I think one other thing that there are two aspects of this next statement that we're excited about, but it's also something just to kind of put in the back of your mind. More data around usage and more contact tracing. The data around usage is not going to go anywhere. Like I said previously, this has more to do with future decisions and comfort around future decisions and changes than it does have to do with anything else. But the fact of the matter is, there's going to be a whole lot more reporting against how assets are used than there ever has been in the past. It's just a kind of a necessity at this point. And then the contact tracing. We're all used to contact tracing from a standpoint of when there was an outbreak, when there was a pocket of a pandemic side outbreak. But contact tracing at this point is more of an HR and risk management. These are things that could have been in place better, that would have helped, and they're going to be in place in the future. Contact tracing, in my mind, is now moving to, especially in our conversations, is now moving to an HR functionality and towards a boardroom. So you're going to have these questions start coming up within your HR side of, are you contact tracing the usage? Where are you contact tracing them? And it's going to become much more passive. It's not going to be quite as aggressive as it is right now. But I would start to assume that commercial real estate in any of its forms will start contact tracing people anytime they're using that building. So that in the future, especially as a country, but really globally, we've learned that we're going to have to respond now differently to events being a pandemic, events being a natural disaster, events being something that has driven, I need to know who that person was around, for their safety or the safety of others, and for the protection and liability behind the building or the company. So I think something we need to get used to is the concept that most assets will have some sort of contact tracing, likely passively, that are going to stay in play in the future. I don't see that going anywhere. And that's one trend that's holding in all the conversations, where lots of things are varying depending on who you're talking to. Like I said before, that one's holding. And then this idea that assets are becoming more of a blend between a hotel and an MLS kind of listing, that assets are becoming much more, they're surfacing their usage and their availability. I think that that's a trend that we are going to see continue. Obviously, we see a lot of listing companies that are coming out that have a lot of space available. If you need an office, a desk, a conference room, whatever it is, but I think that's going to continue. Something with commercial real estate to consider is the amount of dark inventory, meaning inventory that was on the books for companies but was not currently open, was at all-time highs just prior to the pandemic. And then the pandemic hit and the assets start going dark. Stuff that was, lit up, had HVAC running, was usable, then went dark for a long period of time. And now as it's opening, it's not opening up full, it's opening up under partial occupancy, which means the dark unused inventory is actually accelerating. The goal will start becoming for commercial real estate to get that dark inventory that may or may not ever need to be used by that employer, by that tenant, whoever it is, into a marketplace, into something that's going to be usable by others. So I think one of the other trends that we're going to see continue is going to be around the idea that assets need to be treated. An asset, again, is anything from commercial to tenant side, needs to be treated more like a knowable, bookable asset versus a static behind a wall, behind that employer's, this is what I have for my employees. I think there's going to be a whole lot more opening up of what do you have available as they try to shift some of these assets off their books or into a more sustainable place. I think the last thing that I want to just touch on, and I hope that, as far as not done by presentation and more done by discussion, is helpful. But the last thing I wanted to touch on again is this this kind of theory of everything is shifted or nothing is shifted. I don't think I can express enough how much that neither one of those statements are accurate. No matter what, if you pay attention to commercial real estate, if you pay attention to how flex operators are posturing and or making decisions, there is no consensus on how the future of work looks yet, or the future of the workplace looks yet. And I think the biggest fracture that actually did take place and is going to hold is that options are going to be put on the table based on the employer and based on the employee they're trying to attract. It's also going to be based on the employer or the tenant that the commercial building is trying to attract. I think all it's going to mean is that more choices are going to come out of this. The trend is going to go towards more choices. And that's good. I think that's great. So that is the end of my kind of discussion, my kind of talk. I hope that is helpful. And of course, proximity.space, if you guys want to keep track, we actually do publish quite a bit of information that we hear, and we're always welcome to share that. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Josh. Well, that was a lot that you shared. So.
Sorry, it was a lot. Trying to brain dump.
There's so much to think about in this new world that we're facing. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you so much.